Welcome to In Our Town, Conversations with Springfieldians Making a Difference. I'm your host, Tom Carlson, publisher of the Springfield Daily Citizen. If you'd like to comment on this episode, our email is inourtown@sgfcitizen.org. We'd love to hear from you. My guest today is a man who has devoted his life to law enforcement. He is Springfield Police Chief Paul Williams. The chief came to Springfield in 2010, capping a 29-year career as a major in the Tulsa police force. Few people have served here in Springfield as police chief longer than Paul Williams. He joins me today to talk about policing in Springfield, where we have been and where we are going. Chief, welcome to In Our Town.
Tom, thanks for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. I was doing some research on old newspaper articles. I read the article about when they announced you were going to be Springfield's new police chief back in 2010. Mm-hmm. And it said that you came from Detroit, and your dad and grandfather were police officers.
Yep, it's kind of like the family business, it seems like. But yeah, my dad and my grandpa both retired from the Detroit Police Department, and I had intended to go there. But back when I graduated from college in 1980, 81, you might remember there was a little oil crisis, and
that's right.
The auto industry was not in best shape, and Detroit literally drives based on what the auto industry is doing. So they'd laid off about 1,500 police officers in the city of Detroit my senior year in college. So,
well, one time Detroit's like the fifth largest city in the country.
It was, and growing up in the 60s and 70s, million and a half people, it's down to like 600,000 now. And at the time, my dad was in the middle of his career, and he gave me good advice. He said, "Go south and west." He said, "Get away from here, go someplace where you can enjoy a good career and end up in Tulsa, Oklahoma."
Warmer weather for sure.
Hotter weather, yeah. It was definitely hotter, and it wasn't where I thought I was going to be. In fact, the only time I'd been in Tulsa, Oklahoma before I started the academy was the day I went to test for the police department. I'd never been there before, but enjoyed almost 30 years there and continued the family business, if you will.
Well, you've been in the news recently talking about staffing at the police department. The last stats I saw showed that you were about, 60 officers below being fully staffed?
Yeah, we're sitting at 56. I mean, I'll take any increase, but 56 down, it's about double where we should be, more than double. We usually have between 20 and 25 vacancies just because of how extensive our training program is and the selection process. But we've been struggling with that for about the last 4 years, trying to get that number back down to what you'd say is historical numbers.
There has been some parallels drawn about, because what's happened here in Springfield is not unique in terms of...
Not at all. It's a nationwide issue. It really is.
And a lot of that got traced back to the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis in 2010. And I think I can say murder because the police officer was convicted of
Absolutely.
Murder.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah. And then there was this big effort to defund the police, Black Lives Matter, and that sort of thing. A lot of pushback from a lot of people in the country about what police do and how they're viewed. Do you think that affected your recruitment?
Absolutely. We were affected by that. I call it a negative narrative surrounding law enforcement that came out of the George Floyd tragedy and every movement after that. So for a period of about 2 years, every story you saw about policing was negative, and people not only weren't encouraged to join law enforcement, they were encouraged to step away from. We saw more resignations and early retirements than we had in the ensuing 5 or 10 years. So couple all that together, I mean, if you have more people leaving, less people applying, it's hard to keep staffing up. So our applications were cut in half from 2018 to 2021, from about 450 people a year to about 200 people a year.
Then there was all that talk, particularly in some of the larger cities, about defund the police.
Yeah, and
that's kind of counterintuitive to me.
It is, and you've seen that turn around. Every city that even explored that or did something proactively in that way has reversed course and does the other thing. But I say two things about Springfield. One, to address that first, we never saw that here. In fact, our community, our citizens, our city council funded the police. They wanted to make sure I had money to recruit and money for equipment and vehicles. And so that's a very positive thing. And then this community support, we didn't see that movement here. Smatterings of it, but there really wasn't a big sentiment. But we were absolutely affected by that national narrative because we recruit from all over the country. I've hired officers in the last 14 years from literally from Alaska to Florida, from New York to California. We've hired somebody from pretty much every corner of the country. So when all you're hearing is you don't want to be a cop and nobody wants to be a police officer and they're bad, it affects you, and people chose to do other things.
It's a very stressful job from time to time. It has to be. And, I mean, you've lived and breathed this stuff. I've watched it from the outside, but the whole idea that you're getting second guessed constantly in what's a really stressful job, I mean, kind of like, who needs it?
And you're right. It's always been that way, armchair quarterbacking and
Monday morning quarterback.
Monday morning quarterbacking. Certainly the second guessing and people having an opinion, that's always been there for law enforcement. I mean, hey, we function with not just the laws, but case law, and
right.
People do things around the country that affects us, and judges make decisions, and we have to revise and revamp what we do based on a decision. It's usually based on a mistake someone made or went too far. So we're used to that, but I think the prevalence of social media and then the advent of traditional media kind of taking a back seat or expanding on those social media narratives without fact checking, to be honest with you, without being ensure that the facts are accurate, and then a narrative gets out there and it's hard to take that back. That absolutely had an effect. And I talked to my officers during that 2 or 3 year time period, and it was, hey, that's not here, that's not us. And they go, yeah, but we hear that and
right.
We listen to that, and other people think that about us, and it made it really difficult to not just to maintain those we had, but to try to bring somebody brand new into the fold. And it's taken us a couple of years to recover from that. We're back up to about 400 or so applicants a year.
400 applicants?
Yes. Yeah.
But you have what, like 2 cadet classes, only 25 or so? So
yeah.
A lot of people don't make the cut?
We generally, and this is historical, we get about 10% of the people who apply actually make it through the academy.
Okay.
There's a whole process to go through, and I broke this down for counsel because they were asking the same thing, and there's so many steps, and each step we lose people. So the initial step of application to even someone who Human Resources deems meets the minimum requirements and can show up to test, we usually lose about half the people in that first stage. So you're talking about 200 now that are really worthy of showing up and testing.
Well, so what are the requirements? What are the minimum requirements that somebody has to have in order to even apply?
So 21 years of age, no felony convictions. That's kind of like the baseline. We like former military and people with college education, but we also have various ways to do in lieu of that. So if you didn't go to college and you didn't go in the military, but you really want to be a police officer, we've opened the door so you can do things in lieu of. You can go to a post-approved academy. We have our own academy. We pay people to go to the academy. We pay you a salary while you're here, but you can pay on your own to go to somewhere like Drury Law Enforcement Academy and get post-certified as a police officer, and then that is in lieu of college or military experience, gets you in our academy. You still have to go to our academy. You still have to start from the bottom, but that gives you a leg up.
What's the starting salary?
Just a starting salary. We are just about $50,000 now. 47,000 in the academy, and about 51,000 when you graduate.
That's a pretty good starting job.
It's a significant uptick. I can remember 10 years ago I was hoping to get people to 30, and then it was 40, and now it's 50. So,
and they can retire after 20 years? How's that work?
So our retirement program's kind of unique. You're vested after 5 years. And then you can choose to step away at any point. You don't get pension benefits until your normal retirement age. But 50 or 55 is kind of the norm. But you can work 30, 35 years if you want to. There's no upper age limit. As we mentioned just before we started the podcast, there's no requirement that you have to be under the age of 30 or 35 or 40. We've had 50-year-old recruits. So you can come in and work 5 or 10 years, get a second pension if you want. We've got some folks that do that. So,
and you guys pay more than the sheriff's department does, don't you?
Yeah, more than the sheriff's department. We were pretty much on par with the highway patrol until they got a significant pay raise last year. We do an annual comparison in the region. We're certainly the highest, but comparing to other entities that I compare us to, other mid-size cities or major cities, Kansas City, St. Louis, Tulsa, Wichita, Memphis, Little Rock, we're on the lower end of some of those.
At least when I was involved in this sort of thing, the training standards were higher and the training that you required of the police officers was more than in the surrounding police forces.
And that starts with the testing process. We just revised our minimum requirements earlier this year to allow people with work experience. Someone who's a carpenter, an electrician, they own their own business, or a computer programmer, they worked as a detention officer, legal services, whatever it might be, but they don't have the college or the military. We're allowing you to use that as credit to get in and take the test. And then we start written test, physical test, and oral interview. That gets the first 3 stages.
But have you lowered your standards?
No.
Now, you have made some adjustments, though. You're letting folks that have got tattoos to apply and stuff. I mean, that's just what world changes, doesn't it?
World changes. Tattoos and marijuana are probably the 2 major changes we've made.
I don't think I could have been a police officer when I was a kid if that was the rule.
It used to be neither. We've slowly moved the marijuana from you can't use within the last 3 years to a year to now. I jokingly said, when you could smoke a joint on Friday and come test on Monday now because it's legal.
Yeah.
You can't do it when you get here, though, and you're going to have to pass a drug test to get hired. Tattoos, we used to have no visible tattoos. I've got probably about a dozen officers still with us who had tattoos removed to join the police department.
Oh, yeah.
But now it's more socially acceptable. We still don't allow obscene, objectionable, racist, derogatory, anything like that.
Well, we can't tolerate that.
No. But just artwork, is.
Well, let me ask you, let's talk, and I've got a lot of subjects,
Sure.
but I'm interested in this, but maybe you can speak briefly about, are you getting more women to apply, and what about people from diverse backgrounds?
Sure, that's, like I said, I've been here 14 years. You mentioned earlier, and when I got here, we had 0 African-American officers. We only had 6% of our workforce was female. Hispanic, Asian, we always kind of mirror what the community is. So we've tried to maintain that, but our focus has been on diversity and so made slight inroads. We're up to about 12.5% of our workforce is female. The national average is about 12.5%, 13%.
Now, when you say workforce, but a lot of those people are doing desk jobs.
No. These are just officers.
Okay.
If I included my civilian employees, which are about 80% female, we'd be way past that. But no, I'm just talking about officers when I talk about diversity. We were one of the first agency in Missouri, one of the first in the country to join a movement called 30 by 30, which was driven by experienced women law enforcement executives to push a narrative of 30% of every recruiting class should be females by the year 2030. You got to start with the recruits to build up department diversity. So we strive for that with each recruit class. If there's 20 in there, we want 6 of them at least to be female. And it's harder to get women to be police officers. It's always been a male-dominated profession. But I tell my recruiters we have a talent-rich recruiting pool. 52% of the population is female.
Right.
If 12% of our officers are female, there's a 40% gap.
Well, this goes back about 20 years ago, Paul, and I guess it was, in a sense, sort of secret because we had somebody, it was way before you got there, we had some complaints about some police officers in town, and what had occurred was that we got some money from the federal government to hire more police officers. Mm-hmm. So we went and hired a bunch of them, mm-hmm. trained them and hired them. Well, most of them, as you would expect, were young men. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't too long after that, about 6 months, we were getting some complaints in town about how these guys were just not pleasant to deal with and that sort of thing. Just, it wasn't the friendly police officer sort of thing. So we hired this guy from the Los Angeles police force to come look at what the deal is. How come we're getting these issues? And what he said was, and it gets back to having more women on the police force, he says, this is the deal. You hired a bunch of young men, and he says if they're going to some of these domestic disturbance events, they are not really wired to how to deal with that. They want to put somebody in cuffs pretty quick, that sort of thing. And he said if you took a female police officer there, she's got a totally different skill set and be talking people down. And he says these guys will be good police officers, but it's going to take a few years for them to do that. And
it is. I mean, men and women are wired differently, and having a diverse workforce and getting them to work together, they feed off each other, they learn from each other.
That's great.
It really works really well. So I think that's been successful. We want more, of course. And then on our minority representation, I mentioned we had 0 African American officers, and I grew up in Detroit, and a very diverse community.
Right.
I spent 30 years in Tulsa, Oklahoma, another diverse community. So
Right.
it was kind of shocking to me to hear that. But seeing the overall composition of the community, I understood a little bit better. So my goal has always been for us to mirror our community. So every 10 years for sure, but every year the census updates come out and we compare ourselves. What's our percentage of men and women and racial ethnic minorities to the community, and see if we're getting close. The biggest struggle outside of female recruits is African American men and women, to get them to want to be police officers first off, and then want to police in this community. But we're doing better. I actually have 8, not 8%, but 8 men and women who happen to be African American who are members of the Springfield Police Department. And
Well, there's a big diversity push all over across the country, and those people, if they're are doing a good job, can probably go elsewhere and make more money.
so
you're competing.
It's a very competitive recruiting environment. I equate it to recruiting for college athletes. I'm like the D1 football or basketball coach trying to get in your living room and convince you to come play for me, as opposed to going for this guy over here.
You've got your own transfer portal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we're doing better, but that'll be a continuing struggle.
One of the things I bought a motorcycle out in Maryland one time, and I thought it'd be fun to fly out there, buy my motorcycle, and ride it back to Springfield, which I did. But I was fiddling around with the controls and not paying attention, and I went through a stop sign. And sure enough, I got pulled over. And the police officer was very professional, and he got out and he said to me, "I'm wearing a microphone to protect me and you about just what's going on here." I don't think he had a video thing. This has been 10 years ago. Right. But that's becoming, that whole way of interacting with the citizenry is becoming pretty standard operating procedure now.
Absolutely. We asked for body-worn cameras 10 years ago, and it never was a priority for the community, nor to be funded, because they're not cheap. But you mentioned George Floyd. If there's one positive that came out of that, was the community and city council went, "Hey, we think you need body-worn cameras." And I went, "Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've been testing them. Here's my proposal."
There's not a real debate about what happened, is there?
No, not at all. It really helps. So, and my mantra on that was twofold. One, it protects the citizens, but it also protects the officers.
Yeah.
And officers here, they didn't balk at all. It was just like, let's make sure we have a policy on when to use, how to use it. I met with members of the community to address that. We got them, and every officer wears one now. We have in-car cameras and body cameras. They're not a begin-all, end-all. I mean, there's still things they don't see, and you still want that human interaction, human element. But there's certainly actually a positive tool for determining those difference of opinions. If you have a he said, she said between an officer and a citizen, no one else is there. Now we have the third party impartial arbiter, if you will, to kind of help decide what actually went on. And they've been very positive. It's actually lowered our number of complaints in general. The number of sustained complaints is about the same. We don't have very many because our officers actually treat people really, really well. But it's lowered the number of complaints in general because citizens realize we're being recorded too.
Well, everybody's got a cell phone these days too, don't they?
So it's a good balance. It really is.
I was thinking before our interview today, if we really wanted to, or my opinion is, maybe you'll push back on this, if we really wanted to reduce crime, we could do what they do in like London and have these CCTV cameras everywhere. And so, but you would have to balance that with this invasion against personal privacy. Yeah. Do you all have any kind of access to lots of CCTV cameras?
Yes and no. And so you realize we're in Missouri, right? The show me state.
Yes, sir.
Right. And Big Brother's a bad thing.
Yeah.
And personal liberty is number one.
I don't think a city council would survive a recall effort if they
no.
do.
So we'll never see that. And Europe and London's a unique environment where they have that. But we do have, everybody has a cell phone. There's lots of surveillance cameras. You probably don't even realize you can't really go anywhere without being recorded at some point. Mm-hmm. Businesses and private individuals have cameras, but we have traffic cameras around town. We've had those for years. There's some security cameras like down around the square. There's about 40 cameras that record people's movements. And so we have access to those cameras, usually more of an after-the-fact investigatory kind of process. We've also invested in license plate reader cameras, both those that are installed on the cars, but also some stationary ones. There's a really good company called Flock that we have about 20. We just bought somewhere 28 stationary license plate reader cameras all around town. They're recording vehicles only, and used as both an after the fact tool, but also an investigatory tool. We can plug in. We're looking for a stolen car. We're looking for a wanted subject. Here's a description. You actually tell the camera, if you see that, flag it. Tell me. And it does takes a picture and notifies you. So we have access to those.
Do you think that all that reduces crime from occurring in the first place, or it's more just helping you apprehend?
I think both. If you publicize it, and I'm in favor of publicizing. We put those cameras up, and we don't.
Hey, you're on candid camera, my friend.
I mean, there's some neighborhoods that can buy those as well, and they highly publicize. Hey, camera is this neighbor's camera protected. You're being recorded. We kind of balance that. Some we do. We have a problem location. We put up a camera, and it's got a blue flashing light and sign that says, police are watching you. We want to prevent things. Others are a little more discreet. When you're trying to catch a wanted subject, you don't want them to avoid a street or an intersection where the camera might be. So we use both of those things.
What about like in neighborhoods? Everybody's got a Ring doorbell with a camera on it. Do you think that's decreased crime any?
I think those are very helpful. I think they have an impact on crime. I don't think criminals are the smartest, so they don't really pay attention that much.
Yeah.
So more of an investigatory tool, unless you're really publicizing it and saying, like you said, hey, you're on candid camera and you're here. But those are all cameras that we contact people to access. They're not tied into a citywide network that we can just pull up and look at. There are places that allow us to do that, but more as an ad-needed basis. So I don't think we'll ever get to the point here in Springfield or in Missouri where closed-circuit TV recorded throughout the community, and we can assign people to sit down at the control center and just watch all day long for what's going wrong and dispatch folks. But we're getting to the point where it's an absolute helpful tool. I call it a force multiplier. Is we have struggle with staffing. You use technology to augment that and be in more places than you could be if you were just driving around.
Before we move on, I hear a lot about drones. Tell us what's going on with that and your thoughts.
So, technology is important, and it's a force multiplier in any type of technology, but drones have become a very, very useful tool, and we are expanding our use. We've had them for, probably 6 or 8 years, and we use them for, crime scene mapping and search and rescue operations, those kind of things. But we're exploring creating I call it drones as a first responder program, where we'd actually have officers, pulling a couple officers in the field, highly trained folks that would have drone capability to, when a call comes in, they'd be able to throw the drone up and respond first. So
what would that response consist of?
So it's a flyover. So
rather than a 7-minute delay to get in there.
So if not sure how many we're going to get, but they would be deployed around town. So and the operator can be anywhere, but you can deploy them within a couple minutes instead of 15, 20 minutes. So, for example, a shots fired call, a large party, a large disturbance, a crowd gathering, vehicle speeding away from a crime scene. If you can deploy a drone, look at it like a miniature helicopter. I came from a community that had helicopters, and it was an absolutely wonderful law enforcement tool. We're not big enough, nor do we have the money to have a helicopter unit here, but a drone unit where we can use that to respond first, to give a review of the crime scene, or to check and see if officers even need to be sent there, or to get there first and able to direct officers where they need to go, provide overwatch when officers on the scene to see things that might be happening around behind.
That seems like a really good idea. I think that would be well received in the community. I think you'd get some pushback if those drones are just going around up in the sky and people are wondering if the police department's watching.
We're not talking about regular patrol, they're just flying around for just willy-nilly, to do something.
What's going on in Tom's backyard barbecue?
Not at all. I mean, these would be deployed based on a call for service or a complaint.
Makes sense to me.
So I'm even we're exploring. We have a problem. I've got a couple more complaints recently again about speeding motorcycles. And how they create havoc. And they're speeding, they're loud, they're dangerous, and they're all of those things. And, if it's just a speeding motorcycle, 9 times out of 10, if they take off 100 miles an hour down Glenstone, we're not going to chase them because that creates a danger to the public.
Right.
But if we get to the point where I can deploy a drone and it can hover above and follow that person until they stop, and
take
they
a
go
picture
home,
of
they
their
go to get gas,
license plate.
And then we can say they can vector the officers.
You can have
in.
a big megaphone that goes down there and says, "Busted."
I like nothing better than to go, hey, call an officer, and the officer just drives up, pulls up next to him, and here you say you got a picture of them, you got video evidence of what they were doing. Doesn't happen any better than that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. I got a couple drones last year, and looking to get 4 or 5 more this year. We'll see what council decides on the budget coming up.
That's interesting. We'll be right back after this short break.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shannon Kay, and I'm the visual journalist at the Springfield Daily Citizen. I started out working overnights at KTTS. I did do my internship at KSMU. After that, I traveled on down to Branson. I very quickly became the news director down there. Afterward, I started working for Carbon Trace Productions, and there I was the executive director. I really see being a journalist in general as being a public service. My days, they are both regimented and not at all. Doing like my day-to-day task, which includes like the calendar and the obits, from touring along with one of the reporters to working on a Photoshop project so that way we can really make our product here at Springfield Daily Citizen shine.
Well, at the end of the day, you're heading up an organization in town whose job is to provide security to the people of Springfield. And you do it 2 ways. You do it by catching the bad guys, but hopefully by also preventing crime in the first place. Has that balance changed much in the last few years between crime apprehension and crime prevention?
We mentioned George Floyd and staffing, but what we haven't talked about, it was COVID and the impact that had. Impact every part of society, but I don't think people realize the impact it had on crime. We are tasked with keeping people safe, preventing crime, and solving crime, but we can't do it by ourselves. We absolutely need citizen information and contact and input and cooperation. And the worst thing for policing COVID was people stayed home. They closed the doors. They didn't go out. They didn't interact. They didn't talk to us.
Crime went up a lot during that time period.
Crime went up dramatically because it was the police we were kind of on our own.
Interesting.
We weren't getting information from the citizens because they weren't out. They didn't have neighborhood meetings that we could go to. We weren't able to host neighborhood watch or community crime meetings to update people. We moved to a very virtual environment, which allowed crime to grow. So, and I think we've seen that over the last 3 years as we've come out of that, and we've been able to re-engage with the community and really ask people's help to keep themselves from becoming victims, either preventing crime or solving crime. Crime's dropped off the last 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, you've celebrated this past year a pretty dramatic decrease in about every category except, I think, domestic disturbance. That's about even.
You're exactly right. We dropped for the 3rd year in a row. We're about 20 to 25% less crime reported this year, 2023, than we had in 2020. And every year I say we establish a new baseline.
Right.
I want to see it going down. It's crime's like the stock market. It's cyclical. It ebbs and flows, and you have to allow for those fluctuations. But I'm very encouraged, and I point to 2 things. One, we have fantastic men and women that work for the police department and are professional and passionate about what they do and very well trained. But we also have a very engaged community that when we ask them for something, or we want some support, or we want their help, or we put out a PSA about this is how you keep from getting your car stolen.
Yeah.
Take your keys with you, lock the doors, and you won't get your car stolen. Then people are starting to pay attention to those things. So it's a very, very collaborative, cohesive environment that we live in here.
I want you to tell me your thoughts on this aspect of I think it's called community policing. And what I mean by that, I've done a little looking into this, and some police departments will assign a police officer to a particular area of town, for example, Commercial Street or downtown, and they will keep the men and women who are on that assignment there for quite a while because they get to know folks and kind of who they need to watch and who they don't need to watch. And the idea being, as I understand it, they become more effective at their job as a consequence of that. But what I've also heard is that a lot of police departments don't want to keep an officer on that beat for a long time because people get to feeling like either he or she has their favorites, and he or she's not paying attention to this issue and that sort of thing. So I guess my initial question is, what's your philosophy about that?
So this might be a little long answer, so hang with me for a minute.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Community police, I'm a true believer in community policing if done correctly. I've seen it done incorrectly in too many communities where it's assigned to a group or a unit or a section of the police department. It says you're our community policing officers and the rest of us are going to go fight crime. It has to be throughout the whole department. It has to be a philosophy, not a program. The second thing, and I teach at MSU, and one of the classes I teach, I delve into this, and I created what I call the Williams Policing Triangle. Okay, think of a triangle, 3 sides. And traditional policing is proactive policing and reactive policing. So reactive meaning you call 911, I come. I do something to you or for you. Proactive, I go find something, right? I find a speeding motorist. I find somebody breaking into a car. Still the police doing things to or for the public. Those are the sides of the triangle. The base of the triangle is what I call coactive policing, meaning we work together. And if you don't have that, you really can't have a triangle, right?
Right.
Because you take the base away, it falls down, and I use the term flatlining, all right?
Okay.
Medical field.
That's a good word for that.
If you have a flat line, it's dead, right? Well,
yeah.
There is no community policing if the public is depending on the police to do something to them or for them. There's no community policing if the police don't interact with the community and ask for and accept that help. So in a true community policing environment, A, it's a department philosophy, and B, there is true partnership between the police and the community. And so we have that. I think we strive for that. And then the tactical part is boots on the ground, police officers, what they do. You know, we assign. I
don't think you're getting to my point about whether you're rotating these people around.
That's my next statement. Because in that environment, then you have to be familiar with the community that you're serving. So we bid once a year. Officers assigned to a particular area, side of town, shift for an entire year. Okay. And we rotate once a year.
Like Commercial Street, can I stay there year 2? Or
yeah, because seniority drives where you bid.
Is that how it works? Okay.
Yeah, so that's the number one thing. Seniority drives that. Officers choose what shift, what days off, what side of town they want to work based on their seniority, and then we balance that out. We, by who's assigned to what beat within that particular shift and squad. But then we go one step further. We have something, and it was here when I got here. It's a great program. It was about on its last legs, and we revitalized it, expanded it, and revised it, called our Police Area Representatives. So we have a select group of officers. One is assigned to each beat, where they don't answer 911 calls. They don't do patrol. They are that community liaison. And I think when it was originally started, it was like, you're the liaison of the community. Well, I've flipped that and said, you're the liaison of the community and the department. So it doesn't help if I'm your PAR officer and I'm talking to you as a citizen, but I don't go talk to the officers who are patrolling at night.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, so they've got to share and be the conduit of information from the police to the public and the public to the police, and then that's a true community policing, a true coactive policing environment. So, like I said, long answer to your question, but
that's fair.
There's lots of nuances around that. It's easy to say a department's a community policing department or not without really diving into how they're doing that.
I've always thought that the fewer facts a person has, the stronger his or her opinion is.
I understand that.
The more facts you have, the more complicated and gray areas you have to work through. But one of the things you're doing, and I'm hearing a lot of people talk about nowadays, is partnering with other agencies. Particularly, I want you to tell us a little bit about your approach in dealing with mental health issues.
That's something that's near and dear to my heart. I've been doing policing for 44 years now, and I've been involved for about 25 years or so on bringing those components together, mental health and law enforcement. It started way before I got here, but when I got to Springfield, I realized we didn't have a crisis intervention team training program. That's something that's been around for a long time, but started in Memphis, but specially trained officers who get advanced training on mental health aspects to help them deal with those things we come in contact with. That was the first step. Secondly was I wanted a place where officers who encounter those folks experiencing a mental health crisis, they don't need to go to jail. They don't need to go to the hospital, but they need something. You know. But we didn't really have any place outside the hospital or jail to take someone and try to connect them to services. So it took a long time. Took almost about 10 years of badgering and cajoling and being involved and getting support. But we now have what we call our Behavioral Crisis Center, which is a partnership between Burrell, the city, the county, Cox, and Mercy Hospitals.
So if you could, because we're talking lots of big words, but give me our listeners an example of an intervention with somebody and how that would actually play out.
Sure. So people call in, they go, "Hey, there's a guy standing on the street corner, and he looks like he's talking to himself. He's accosting people when they come by. He's not panhandling. He just, oh my gosh, now he's over. He's peeing in the corner. All right. Now, is that a violation? Is that a crime? Absolutely. But does that person really need to go to jail for that? Probably not. So the officers get the call, because everyone calls the police for everything, right? We are the number one call. The officer gets there and goes, all right, this person doesn't have any warrants out. They don't need to go to jail. They don't have a medical condition. In the past, our issue could have been,
I guess most of the time they're high on something.
It could be. Substance abuse is a primary driver of mental health issues. Right. But trying to assess that in the field for an officer is very difficult. And so it ended up, all right, we'll write him a ticket or we'll take him to jail. Or I'll take him, maybe he's really seriously mentally ill, and if he's a threat to himself, I'll take him in for a 96-hour evaluation and see if the medical professionals can help him there. But what we have now is the Behavioral Crisis Center, meaning the officer can talk to that person, do everything I just said, and go, they really need some help, and say, hey, why don't you come with me? I'm going to take you over here, and we're going to try to connect some services. They're not under arrest. They can't be forced to go, but it gives them an opportunity to get in the car and take them somewhere where within 15 to 20 minutes, that's the initial review by a mental health professional, they determine if this person needs help and how to best connect them to services.
That's great.
The important thing for me, from a policing standpoint, that officer gets to leave. They don't have to wait around for anything. You
can do a handoff.
They hand them off. You call it a warm handoff if you want, and they go back to doing policing. So that was our first foray. About 4 or 5 years ago, we finally stood that up. It's a great program. I tell you what I've been most surprised by is we only take about 10 to 12% of the people that they see in there. I thought it would be like 30 or 40% of police interaction. But what we see is about half the people go there because it's a walk-in. They get self-referred, or a family member brings them in, or they go on their own to go get connected to services. Another 25 or 30% are the hospitals. I mean, people are still showing up at the emergency room with these issues. The hospital can refer them as well and go, you don't need to be clogging up the emergency room. Go over here and get some help for your mental health services. So it's been a great, I think, improvement in how we deal with people and how we're able to address them and not see them time after time after time. And then we expanded that almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago now. Burrell Behavioral Health got a grant to help us establish a co-responder program, meaning I have licensed mental health professionals and police officers who are either riding in a car together or are on 24-hour call, that they can do that handoff in the field without having to take them somewhere. It frees up the officers to go do what people really need us doing, which is fighting crime. That program is I think is very successful so far. We're in the final stages of potentially getting a grant in the police department to double the size of that program, and in discussions with Burrell, and then we'll certainly be presenting to City Council here in the near future about that. It's reducing that national figures, about 7 to 17% of every contact officers have is someone experiencing a mental health crisis. So think about that. So even if I take a 10% number for Springfield, we've got about 100,000 calls for service a year where police officers respond. So I can take 10,000 of those and go, this doesn't require policing. This requires mental health
a
services.
Different kind of intervention.
You go deal with this, and I can go back to doing this.
Right.
It really helps people, keeps officers focused, and it prevents some of those very tragic things we've seen across the country where officers engaged in a episode with a mental health professional who does something that requires officers to take action, either hurt them or in some cases, if they're armed with a weapon, use a weapon and someone ends up getting hurt or killed.
What's your sense? Do we have a greater or lesser mental health crisis now than we did in years past?
Depends how far back you're going to go.
Okay.
I think this can all go back to the not just a state or local effort, but a nationwide effort to reduce incarceration, voluntary incarceration for mental health, and they turn people loose. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, I know there were some involuntary incarceration people that didn't need to be locked up and really needed to have mental health treatment, and there's great outpatient services. But the problem with that was I don't think we, the government, the citizens, realized the extent of those services and didn't fund it, provide it. And so we have people wandering the streets who don't have access. So we are building our way back to providing that network of resources. So worse than it was, better than it is.
You know, my wife worked out at the medical center for a couple of years early on in our career, and she worked for the attorney for the medical center, and so she had access to all these files of these prisoners there. And she told me one time, she says it's almost boring to look at those files because she says in every file there are three main things you're going to see. In two out of these three main things you're going to see in every file. You're going to see a history of child abuse, drugs or alcohol, or mental illness. And about every person's going to have at least two of those things, you know. And some of that stuff is not directly crime related. But, I mean, you can't let people continue to harm the public at large. But
there's a lot of codependency, you know, substance abuse and mental health issues, and you can debate all day which one causes the other or they feed off each other. But as the sheriff used to say, man, the Greene County Jail is the biggest mental health facility in the county.
Well, he's right.
And he's right. And pretty much everyone who gets to that point, who's committed a crime that's going to get them locked up, is going to have a substance abuse and or mental health issue as well. There's very few, I think there's very few people who are absolutely what we would consider normal, all right, who don't have a mental health condition. They don't abuse drugs. They don't abuse alcohol. They are hardworking. They go to work every day. They take care of their family, who then turn around and commit a crime that's going to get them locked up.
There's not a lot of Bernie Madoffs in the Greene County Jail.
No. So it's something that, but there's also a segment of those folks that if they get connected to services and can get some help to address one of those issues, mental health issues, substance abuse, then the intent, the proclivity, the initiative to go commit a crime to address those issues is removed. So maybe you turn that person around and we don't see them anymore.
Well, I just put it out there for what it's worth. My wife's dad was a federal prison warden, and he worked his whole career in corrections, and a lot of his career was with juvenile defenders before he kind of moved up the ladder. And he said if he was a sentencing judge, what he would do would have, some kid gets thrown in jail for 4 months. He said he'd put them in the jail cell by themselves and read some books or something, but it's going to be a very boring existence, something that's not fun, and not all they would sit there and think about why they're there and do they want to do this again.
Right. There's some truth to that, as opposed to making it where you get to pick which channels you want to watch on TV, and you get time to work out, and you have 3 scheduled meals a day, and there's some truth to that, to making it uncomfortable.
Exactly. And I suppose if they're a career criminal, maybe you want to have a different approach, but that's another thing. Well, there's so many things I want to talk to you about, but we don't have time. I wanted to ask you about gun violence, working with the other agencies, what our jail situation is now. Just briefly, do we have enough room now if you want to arrest somebody that the sheriff's not going to turn them away?
Absolutely. You know, the new jail and the new agreement that we reached with the sheriff after he basically closed the doors for a couple of years has put all that to rest. You know, we have what the Sheriff Art and I jokingly refer to as the Springfield wing, or the Springfield pod. So we have 48, a whole pod, guaranteed beds for municipal prisoners. And we've never, well, when we first opened the jail up again, we exceeded that number a couple months, but we generally run in the 25 or so municipal prisoners, municipal only prisoners. So we have no issue whatsoever with arresting people and having some place to lock them up for municipal charges. Other, felony charges, those more serious, we've never really had an issue with that, although there was a unfortunate expansion of what they call the book and release program, which was
or derogatorily called catch and release.
Yes, I've heard that too. So we've been able to work together to revise that, and there are a lot more crimes you get locked up for. So Sheriff and I, we have a really good working relationship.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
And the jail was I supported that. We absolutely need it. I still remember the very first meeting I had with the old City County Criminal Justice Task Force, and I'd only been there about 2 months, and Roseanne Bentley asked me, she goes, Chief, you're brand new. What do you think about our jail? And I go, well, I've only been a couple months, but I can tell you it was built too small. It was built the wrong way. And that didn't go over very well with any of the folks from the county. And I still remember all 3 commissioners coming to me afterwards going, and the sheriff, what are you talking about? And I go, well, you guys spent way too much money on what looks like a medium maximum security facility when you need a minimum security. Pods, dormitory style, provide more space, and you got to, I hate to say it, but you have to build it for growth. So we finally have that. That's what we have now. And I hope we don't fill it. It's not full yet. I think last time I looked, the sheriff said they're averaging about 990 folks, and it'll hold 1,200. So we don't have any room. We have room spare.
He can rent out the Greene County Jail Hotel to other agencies.
I think he's filling that with federal prisoners. Those. I'm just talking about the ones that we actually put there.
Well, one thing I want to ask you about, law enforcement's changing. There's lots of different innovation. What keeps you up at night? What do you worry about?
Right now it's 2 things, and staffing is one thing. Trying to make sure I can pull folks in and help the men and women here and give them some relief by adding to our ranks. And fortunately, it's a slow process. I wish I could just go out and hire 20 people tomorrow, but our hiring process is 6 to 9 months long. Our academy is 6 months long, and field training is 3 months. And they're really good when they get out there, but it takes us a long time to get there. And then on the crime front, and I've said this before, it's nothing new. Gun violence is the number one issue that still is a concern in our community. You mentioned crime stats are down, and except for domestic, which is an internal thing, it's kind of stagnant. But gun violence there's really 2 aspects. Criminals with guns, we always have had, and we're going to have, and we fight that, and we put those folks in jail, and we take their guns away. But what I've seen in the last 5 or 6 years, the increase in responsible citizens using guns to settle disputes and use them in an irresponsible way. And that's the scary thing. People that they lose a fight, they lose an argument, and the first thing, they get mad at somebody driving, and the first thing they do is they resort to grabbing that gun out of the console or their purse or their waistband and going, here, I'm going to show you. That is no place in our society. So we are really pushing a responsible gun ownership and gun use message to the public. I'm a gun guy, right? My dad was a retired policeman and a gunsmith and a lifetime member of the NRA, and my wife says I have more guns than I need. But you know what? Except for the one I have in my hip, they're all locked up in my gun safe at home.
Right.
There's no reason to have them out unless I'm going to use them appropriately. I think too many people think that they're fun to just have and use, and then you resort to using them inappropriately. So if I can get that message out to folks, if you're a responsible gun owner, please be responsible. And then if you're a criminal in using a gun, we're coming after you. We're going to take them away from you. We're going to put you in jail.
I like to think that I have friends on both sides of that issue, either pro-gun or anti-gun, whatever you want to call it. But there's not a lot of rational discussion between those 2 groups.
That's the unfortunate thing.
You're either with us or you're against us, And
I'm trying to walk that line in the middle and going, I can see responsible gun owners want their guns. Absolutely. We'll use them responsibly and use them appropriately. And I also see the people that think nobody should have them. I see the argument, but I also go, no, this is the United States of America. We're going to have guns.
That's right. There are more guns in the country than there are people.
That's people like me who have more than they need. I've got enough to fill my whole neighborhood if I need to. But and that's not a bad thing. I hunt, I shoot. It's sporting, it's fun. But it's all used in a very, very safe manner, and it's unfortunate that people don't use them that way.
Chief, as I said, there's so many things I'd like to talk to you about. I hope I can get you to come back again in the near future.
Absolutely. I'll do part 2.
Okay.
We'll make this a series if you want.
Well, thank you again for being our guest today in our town.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome. That's it for this week, and many thanks for listening. If you'd like to listen to other episodes, you can visit the Springfield Daily Citizen website at sgfcitizen.org/innertown or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.